Good afternoon. Social Work Today, now in its 17th year of publication, is proud to be the recognized resource for practical, reliable, and interesting information for social work professionals. Thank you for joining us today for Safety, Ethics, and the Elephant in the Room, presented by Wanda Anderson. Before we start the presentation, I have a quick point of housekeeping. At the end of the session, our presenter will be taking questions. If you have a question for her, please type it in the question box in your control panel, and we will try to address as many questions as time allows. Today's presentation is brought to you free of charge by University of New England's online Master of Social Work program. Wanda Anderson, MSW, LCSW, has been a clinical social worker for 26 years. She worked as an administrator, supervisor, trainer, and clinical social worker prior to joining the UNE faculty in 2003. She was hired as an assistant professor and coordinator of the Presque Isle Satellite Program prior to transitioning to the online program option in 2007. She worked with field faculty to create the interactive online field seminars. Her primary responsibilities include teaching field seminars as well as online coordination of online field students. Wanda continues to offer statewide trainings on social work ethics. Welcome, Wanda.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate everybody joining us today. So when I was asked to put together a presentation, my first thoughts were to talk about safety. This is a very timely topic, and I think it's a topic that we don't talk enough about. Having been in this field now for nearly 30 years, whenever we talked about safety the first 20, 25 years, it was always about our clients. It was never about us as social workers. So I hope as we go through this presentation today that it will allow you to pause and think about your own safety a little bit and maybe leave with a couple of new thoughts. So to begin with, I do want to talk about why we are talking about safety today versus 15, 20 years ago. So some of my thoughts are we've cut a lot of programs across this country. We've cut a lot of staff. The staff that we have maintained, we've asked them to increase their caseloads. We see a steady increase in caseloads year after year. We have cut our hospital stays. I think back 20 years ago when I first started doing some of this work, that individuals would go in a psychiatric hospital, have a stay, have their medications looked at, stabilization, and then we would look to transition them to another program. Most of our psychiatric and our hospital stays across this country are in and out over 1 or 2 days now. They are released to the community for stabilization on meds. So we're seeing a huge cut in that. We're cutting our rehab times. Rehabilitation, we are allowing people to go to hospitals for a few days and they're released back in the community. We have a lot of limits to our outpatient services. We now have most of our insurances are set up, so we as social workers need to dial in and ask for a number of services before we're able to get okay to see clients. We've shut down a great deal of services. We've shut down a lot of our residential. We've shut down a lot of services in general. And our communities have less money. So I think the notion 15, 20 years ago was we would begin to shut some of these services and transition the monies to the communities, and that hasn't happened. So we have more individuals in the communities, we have higher needs, we have less services, we have less monies, therefore we have a lot more frustrated individuals in the community. The reality is for us today that we do not really talk about safety training for social workers. I have to tell you, I do a lot of ethics trainings. I go to a lot of ethics trainings, and it's pretty rare that I ever see an agenda come up on safety. So when I was asked a few years ago to consider this for NASW, I was thrilled, and I've been talking about safety every chance I get since then. So why don't we demand safety training as social workers? I think we are working in an environment today where your job is extremely important. You might be the breadwinner. You can't lose your job. I think we also sometimes feel that everybody else is doing this work. If our colleagues around us are not talking about safety issues or concerns and we blow the whistle, will people think that we're not able to do the work? Another issue I hear a lot from agencies is we've never had an incident. One of the things I say is it only takes one safety mistake and your entire career is done. So we don't really have the same opportunity to look at an incident and kind of break that down and go back and look at it with safety as we do with some other issues. So I think not having an incident doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking about safety. The other thing that I think we're seeing across this country and working with social work students as interns and new employees is we are not offering supervision as we used to. Again, in our profession, those of you that have been out there 10 years or more, when we graduated from a master's program or a bachelor's, you were often hired and it was a given that you would get supervision. I receive calls on a weekly basis from students who are being asked to pay for their own supervision outside of their job today. So we're not providing the supervision. So if we're not talking about safety and we're not providing the support at the agencies, then that becomes an ongoing issue. So my topic is safety, ethics, and the elephant in the room. So who is the elephant in the room? You probably all know this, but I think it's important to talk about it and put it on the table. Money is the elephant. We have to talk about it. A lot of agencies feel, I think, if we start talking about safety, that the easiest solution often is having two people go to every situation. If you're going into the community, that means more money. A lot of our insurance or our payees are not paying to have two individuals, so we're sending a lot of individuals out one person. So I think the big elephant is the money. Let me say that what I hope we can talk about is there are a lot of other smaller solutions that don't cost the money. So my hope is that you can go back to your agency after today and talk about some of the things that we put on the table, and they don't require more money being spent. Once we start talking about money, a lot of agencies will shut down and say, we won't be doing that. So I do want to acknowledge as well that there are some smaller elephants. Money is the big one. The smaller elephants are, as I said a little bit earlier, we don't always feel safe talking about safety. We feel, I think, sometimes as social workers, given the grassroots of our profession, that we need to be strong. You go to work, you do your work, you listen to a lot of trauma, you're supposed to be able to go home and deal with that. Female, which is the majority of our profession, females often feel that if they have a male counterpart who's doing it, they should be able to do it. And the flip side of that is, I've talked to a number of males who feel that certainly they should be manly enough to do it, that if they're females doing the job, then the last person who should be complaining about safety is a male. So I think when you add the money issues and then the smaller elephants, I think so many of us are going to work every day and doing the work we need to do and not talking about the safety. So NASW has really done a terrific job over the last, I think, 10 years of writing more articles and talking about safety. They also, NASW has, if you go to their website, and I don't work for NASW, but as a profession, this is really our guidelines, so I like talking about that. They have many smaller brochures that you can get that have great information in them. And one of the ones they published in 2013 is NASW Guidelines for Social Worker Safety in the Workplace. And I have to tell you, it is a phenomenal brochure. So if you can actually go to the website and download it, you can print it, or you can order a few for your office, but it really has terrific information. One of the things that they say is establishing safety guidelines for the profession is timely, as the profession is expected to grow by 25% by 2020. So we're now 2018, and the profession is growing, but I think as it grows, we need to really be talking and thinking about safety. I put a link here as well. You can, I think we'll be sending this presentation out to you afterwards. So you can, there's a couple of videos in here, there's a few links for you all, there's some resources, so I want you to be able to take those back as well. So the link here is for the publication, it's called a booklet, but the publication on the guidelines. Whoops, all right. So in 2010, NASW published an article called The Urgency of Social Worker Safety, which was published by Dr. Kelly. And one of the things that he said is, in the past few years alone, we have witnessed the fatal stabbing of a clinical social worker in Boston, the deadly beating of a social worker aide, a social service aide in Kentucky, the sexual assault and murder of a social worker in West Virginia, the shooting of a clinical social worker and Navy commander at a mental health center in Baghdad, and the brutal slaying, which is probably one of the most famous incidents that we've talked a lot about, the brutal slaying of social worker Teri Zenner in Kansas. These are only a few of the murders of our colleagues, which along with numerous assaults and threats of violence, paint a troubling picture for this profession. And it's interesting to me that this was published in 2010, and most of us were not talking about it. We are now in 2018. There have been more and more incidents, and we're still really not talking about this in our agencies, in our profession, in our schools, and across the board. So Teri Zenner, who I mentioned is one of the most famous, the incident with Teri Zenner actually happened in 2004. And she was a mental health social worker who went out to visit a client in their home. It was a routine visit of a 17-year-old. And during that visit, I'm not going to read the whole incident here. During that visit, she agreed to go to his room and see something, which is not unusual for us. If some of you are saying, why did she do that? Those of us that have done a lot of home visits certainly spend a fair amount of time in the homes of our clients, and it's not that unusual sometimes to go to a 17-year-old or 12-year-old's room who wants to show you something that they have. His mother left for a period of time. We're still not quite sure what happened today, but he stabbed Teri while she was there. She ended up dying from the incident. Her husband then went on to try to enact a couple of laws around social worker safety, which was really one of the first real movements, I think, in talking about if we're going into homes that we need to really begin talking about safety. So one of the reasons I put this one up here is I think it's important because one of the things we say a lot in our profession is we need to assess the home. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But what we also know is even if we've assessed the home, this was a home where she was familiar going in. This was a client that she knew. This was a client that she felt she was safe in going to down to his bedroom to see something. So when we work with clients who have a variety of mental illnesses, whether it be depression or schizophrenia, we're never quite sure what they may be, where they may be, or what the assessment of their behavior might be that day when we go there. So one of the things that I would say is that we not only assess the home for safety, but we need to assess the home every time we go there if we're going to somebody's home. I do have to say, when I do a webinar like this, I can't see if everybody's shaking their heads or following me, so it's harder to talk to you all and not see anybody. I also have a link here, which I'm not going to show you, but that you can go and watch. It's on YouTube, and it is from KUJH-TV, which talks about a new law requiring safety for social workers. We are seeing now, I think there's 6 or 7 states across the country that are enacting social worker laws, requiring social workers to have safety training on a yearly basis. I really ideally hope that we will see it in all 50 states. I think it's incredibly necessary, and I think we need to be talking about it. And the only way I think we're really going to do it across the board is if we do it as a mandated part of our profession. Another incident I want to share is Frances Mortenson, which was in 2011. She was in New York. She went to visit a 26-year-old client. And she was also stabbed during that home visit. She was not killed. She did survive the stabbing, but it was another incident that was in the news and it was talked a lot about. The client who stabbed her, was charged with second-degree murder and criminal possession of a weapon. I think whether or not somebody's charged, if we go into a home and something like this happens, we only have, as I said earlier, one chance to make a mistake, and we're not going to have another chance in our profession. So I think it's very, very important that we talk about safety and we look at it, because we're not going to, if you're Teri or Frances and this happens, you're not going to have the second chance. I mentioned the Teri Zenner Social Worker Safety Act was introduced in 2009. It was not enacted when it went in as a bill the first time. Her husband put it through. It was later enacted and passed as a Social Worker Safety Act. So I know we hear a lot in the news around workplace violence today. Certainly, it's an ongoing, and whether that's at a university or school settings or post office or workplace violence in general, we're talking about that. What we're not doing is really translating that back to social work. The U.S. Department of Labor, OSHA, which on violence against health and social service workers in 2016 said, workplace violence in the healthcare and social service sectors has been a huge problem that doesn't get the attention it deserves. Between 2001 and 2013, there have been 24,000 workplace assaults annually. So that's not between 2001, 2013, 24,000. That's each of those years, 24,000 workplace assaults annually. And nearly 75% of those took place in a healthcare setting or a social service setting. In 2014, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that the employees in those two sectors, healthcare and social services, alone suffered 52% of all workplace violence incidents. What's even more disturbing is the fact that their deaths and injuries are preventable. And this is what really shocks me every time I read this. But more than 80% of the U.S. employers report no change in their workplace violence prevention measures after a major violent incident. I will say it's been my experience in social work that we often do make policy changes after an incident. In the case of safety, it may be too late for somebody, but I just think it's important, and if you take any information away, this is one of the things to share with your agency. I mean, a lot of times we talk in social services about going into homes, going into the communities. I want to stress that you are at much risk in your office as well. And I think we assume an office is a safe place, and we don't really talk about what we need to do for safety in the workplace office. Another part of that report stated that healthcare workers' injuries, which result in days away from work, students are 3%, coworkers are 3%, other persons are 1%, the assailant is 1%, and the patient is, the person who creates the violence. That's what I meant to say. It's 3% is the student, 3% a coworker, others are 1%. The patient is 80% likely to be the aggressor. So in 2013, 80% of the serious violent incidents reported in the healthcare setting were caused by interactions with patients/clients. So let's talk a little bit. Most of us as social service workers work in the homes, in the communities, or in the office. Some of you may have a strictly office job. We are seeing more and more individuals going into the communities and going into the homes today. So I think it's important when we talk about safety that we talk about all of those settings. I like this photo here with snow. I was sharing that I came to the office today, and I'm in northern Maine, and I had to drive through the snow to get here. So when we're going into the communities, we're going into homes and we're going into apartments. And I have to tell you, my second job I ever had when I graduated, which was about 24 years ago, I was working for a crisis program, and we were going into homes, and my supervisor said, homes are dangerous places, and when families are in crises, they're even more of a dangerous place to be. And later, I remember hearing someone else in that same agency say, homes are sanctuaries, they're not dangerous places. And it's taken me 25 years to realize the answer's in the middle somewhere, that homes are not dangerous places, and homes are sanctuaries, but there are some homes which are dangerous. And I think because of that, if you, in your profession, visit 600 homes and only one is ever a safety risk, you need to be prepared. There's no opportunity to say, I'm only going to encounter this once out of 600, so I don't need to talk about it. So I do think the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I never, ever advocate when I work with supervisees that they should not be going into the community or the homes. We should be. It's where people live. It's where we get a better sense of who they are and what they need. But we need to be talking about our own safety when we do that. So I want to talk a little bit, too, about some of the issues we encounter and some of the cultural barriers. So I know, for example, for me, I live in an incredibly rural area. Guns are a part of people's homes. Guns are passed down from generation to generation. People hunt. And there are a lot of families that I work with, if we ever said to them, you're going to need to give up your guns, it would be like asking them to cut off their left arm. So I think in many different communities, that's a part of it. And if we're going into homes with guns, then that's immediately a safety risk right there that we need to think about. Some of the other issues, we may often be going into unfamiliar areas. Some of the homes we visit may be off the grid. Cell service may be very spotty. I know in Maine right now, as in all of your states as well, we have elections going on, and one of our individuals running for governor is talking about how not connected we are still as a state of Maine. We have many, many areas that do not have internet, that do not have cell service. I mean, we're a very rural state, and there are many other states across the United States that are very rural. So we need to be aware of that. I think we sometimes have a sense that we travel with the cell phone, and that's always at arm's length, but that's not always true. I always want to talk about pets, particularly guard dogs, protective dogs. If I know and I'm going into a home, I always ask ahead of time if they could put their dog in a back room. I've gone to homes where there have been very large snakes that have been outside. I always encourage you as a social worker that I think you want to assess that before you go in. I always encourage you should be able to ask that if that makes you uncomfortable. If there are large dogs, I think we want to ask, can those be put in a back room? Can we set that up in that way? Going into apartment buildings, hallways are often dark. There's not lights, even if it's during the day sometimes. You can be going down hallways that are often blocked. There can be unsafe materials around, so you always want to be aware of that. The other thing I think we need to think about when we're out in the community is that even if we have access and we can reach the police, they may be very slow to respond. We had an incident with an intern through the university recently who was out at an apartment building, and there was an incident of violence, and they called the police, and the police took about 40 minutes to arrive. And when the police did arrive, they made a comment that, we're so used to being called here that it's not always a high priority, which is a very sad thing. So if you are working in areas where it may be known to be an area that's more dangerous, I think you certainly want to know how quick the police are going to respond. What are your backup options, all those sorts of things. I think when we talk about risks in agencies, I don't think we really talk a lot about this. I think we want to look at, are you working alone? I've worked alone in every agency I've ever worked at. I've gone in on Saturdays and never necessarily told the main office I'm going to be going into the office alone today to catch up on paperwork. I would encourage you to think about not being alone in your agency, period. Agencies are generally where clients come, they're where they're seen. It may be where a client was upset when they last left. And if there's any way possible, I would encourage you to think about always having someone else in the agency when you're there. Do you have safety policies in your agencies? Is that something that is written up? What if you're in an unsafe area? I've certainly had students who are doing internships in areas where they have had guards walk them out to their cars. If you are in an unsafe area, you really want to know, what is the support and how are you going to get back to your vehicle? Unlit parking lots. A lot of areas may not have streetlights. I visited an office in a very rural area, and there were no streetlights. There were no outside lights, period. So I think you want to have a plan for that. If you park far away and it's going to be dark when you leave, can you move your car closer to your building? And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other tips, but I really think if you're in an office and you go in that morning at 8 o'clock and it's light out and there's lots of people around, that you want to think about, if I'm not leaving here tonight until 7:30, and when I leave tonight, there may not be all those other people around, and I might be in a really unsafe area of my community. The article by Dr. Kelly from 2010 stated, job-related violence affects not only the professionals who experience it, but also their families, their clients, and their communities. According to a study from NASW Center for Workplace Studies, social workers with the least amount of experience, 0 to 5 years, are most likely to experience safety issues on the job. Now, the issue with that is when you have the brand new social workers are the most likely to have issues with workplace violence, we also then are talking about the fact that we're not giving them the supervision that we needed, as we said. So you have unexperienced social workers, brand new social workers going into very difficult situations and not getting sometimes the support they need as well. Numerous states, including California, New Jersey, Washington, Kentucky, have adopted safety guidelines for social workers. And as I said, I hope this continues. The University of New England has been placing social workers for, I think our program, campus program, has been around a little over 30 years right now. And I would say about 7 or 8 years ago, we had a few incidents, not really violent, but where we had one student in a placement where they were encouraged by the placement to carry a concealed weapon. They were in such a bad part of town that the workers who went out, they were street workers, carried concealed weapons. And as a university, we decided we wanted to talk about this, and we decided that we wanted to create a safety agreement. So every time we placed an intern, we would ask them to go to their agency and talk about the safety agreement, which would say things like they wouldn't be alone in the building, they would have a safety training, that there would be safety policies. And I have to tell you, when we began this 7 or 8 years ago, I would say 80% of our students came back and said, the agency I'm at does not have any kind of safety policies. They have no procedures in their agencies, they have no policies. And a lot of them are saying things like, we work with elders, so safety is not an issue. We work with infants, so safety is not an issue. So because they had never had an incident, they felt that was something they didn't need to do. So as a university, we have really felt we could take the lead, and what we now often ask our interns to do is say to the agency, how would you feel if I help you write some policies? So they can take some of the research we have around safety, and they can help agencies begin to initiate some of the safety policies. Every agency we've worked with has been receptive to this. So, but it's allowed our interns across the country and even across the world to begin to have some conversations about safety in the agencies. So again, I would ask you as you leave today, when you leave this presentation, to really look at your own agency, do you have protocol? And this really is also if you're in private practice, if you're the only person, have you thought about safety? What does your agency do for safety orientation if you have somebody new? I used to do some consultation with a very large agency, and they had a policy, and I might get the name wrong, but if you were in your office and you needed help, you could push a pager and page Dr. Strong. So they knew that meant they needed the police. So you would say, Dr. Strong. So one day, a clinician felt there was a client was really angry and aggressive. So she called the front office and asked for Dr. Small, and they had a temp, and the temp said, we don't have a Dr. Small who works here. So one of the first things I have to say is if you have safety protocol, everybody needs to be trained on it. So you have to make sure if you have temps or other people, and there was a big to-do with the agency because they realized they had this protocol, and probably the first time in 10 years they used it, they had a temp who said, we have no Dr. Strong. So they had to have backup plans. So make sure you're talking, if you do have a policy, that you dust it off and everybody knows what it is. So what is your own plan if you feel safe? I would ask all of you out there, I don't know what your roles are, but those of you that are supervisors, that are program directors, that are agency directors, that are field instructors, that you, when you wrap up today or when you leave this presentation, that you think about what piece can I do as somebody who's in a role of, or a position of power or a role of supervisor, that you can maybe begin to talk about those you supervise and put this issue of safety on the table and begin to talk about it. I like with my interns, I use this a lot, safety first. Safety, the other, you're going to see safety trumps everything. Safety has to be one of those issues that when a social worker feels unsafe, safety has to come first. It can't be, it took me a month to set this visit up. It can't be if I cancel this, I don't know when we're ever going to have another meeting. Safety has to come first. So I think even for your agency, it means sometimes that they're going to say, does this involve money or other things? I think any agency that honors their workers has to really be able to put this on the table and say safety does come first, that we can talk about it, and if people feel unsafe, we'll back them up. Because you also need to be backed up if you are going to talk about safety. So one of the things I want to, there's tons of different checklists. I have one I use myself, but we often share with our students a checklist which was created by NASW, Massachusetts chapter in 2001. It's incredibly comprehensive. I'm not going to go over all the things on it, and they're not necessarily pertinent to everybody, but I have picked a few things out of here. You can Google and pull up this checklist if you want. It's very, very helpful. And I encourage you to maybe take different parts out of it and use it for a training in your own office. So some of the general safety that I just want to kind of put out there is to really look at your surroundings and be familiar with the area. If you're going somewhere you don't know, I encourage you today, the internet is incredible, right? It's opened the world up to all of us. You can Google an area before you even go. If you're working in a very urban area, you want to know how far out you're going. If you're in a very urban area, you want to know, are you in a bad area? What else is going on out there? Are there, are there bars around? Are there people who might be drinking? Are you out in your hunting range if you're going out into a rural area? You really want to spend, I think, a little bit of time getting a sense of your areas that you're sending people out. The other thing I want to mention, which I think is one of the things we fail the most at, is a daily schedule. When we first asked some of our interns about safety and to talk to their agencies, I was amazed. I asked the students, I said, when you go out and do home visits Friday afternoon, as an intern, who knows where you are? And they said, nobody. And I said, who knows when you get home? They said, my spouse. So, and I've now traveled to a lot of agencies across the state, and it's amazing to me how little we know about where people are at. We all have calendars. None of us keep them updated. We often need to have a lot of billable hours, so we go on out to a visit. We go to a home. They're not there, and we go to our next home. Or we pick up our cell and we call somebody who we didn't get to see the day before, and we say, could I come and visit you? And they say yes, and we don't call the office and tell them. I'm absolutely amazed at how many people float around out there, and agencies do not know. I used to work at an agency that had a very large metal board with everybody's names, and if you ever looked at it, it was always about 2 weeks outdated. So what is the good of having a calendar if you're not updating it? We really have the capacity today. There are a lot of different calendars you can use electronically. I really encourage you to think about, if you have an agency that people are going out to any type of outside visits, that you look at a calendar that could be simple, and that even if somebody's at a home and that visit gets canceled, that when they get back in their car, that there's a way they can use an app to update that so the office knows. The office knows Sally went out to this visit, the Smith family was not home, and she's now moved on to the next visit. So I really encourage you to look at a way that you can keep this updated. We can track people today. We can do all kinds of things. But again, I every time I ask my interns that, most agencies still have a system where people go on home visits and don't keep the agency updated. Have a mobile phone available. Again, pretty much all of us have a cell phone that we're using. I do think that you want to have a plan with your supervisor. As I said, we have to have the motto safety first. So if you're going to go out to a home that there's a question of risk, you want to have talked to your supervisor or your team before and have some sort of a plan in place around. And I think the other one is I come from the background of crisis work, so I always expect the unexpected, but we don't always do that if we go into homes, and I think we do need to be prepared for the unexpected. So I think that's one of the things. The schedule I was talking about, if you go out for a field visit or for a visit and you go out on Friday afternoon, the agency closes, what is the plan that if you stay at that family's home until 6 o'clock that somebody knows when you leave? What is the plan if you need help? All of those types of things. So again, if you're using a schedule at your office, how updated? I just did a recent ethics training about a month ago, and there were about 50 people there, and I asked them about this, and I would say 30 out of the 50 said, we really don't keep it updated. Like, we put down who's there, but if we change a visit, we don't keep it updated. So it's no good to you. If you're going out on a home visit, I think an agency has an obligation to know where you are. I once had somebody tell me, well, I text my spouse when I leave so they know. And I say, first of all, you really shouldn't be texting your spouse because it's probably confidential, but your agency should know when you leave there. I live in an area that's incredibly rural, and you could be leaving there at 6 o'clock and have a flat tire, or your car could break down somewhere. And if your agency's shut down and nobody knows where you are, then it's going to be kind of hard for somebody to be able to track you. So I encourage you to think about all those things. Some of the community concerns. So around your agency, your parking lot in your community, I mentioned this briefly. I think after dark, if possible, can you walk out with a partner? Can you go to a group to a car? I used to teach at a local university that was very rural, and when my students were leaving, I used to teach a lot of evening classes. I would always say to them, can you guys go out in pairs? And they always looked at me like that was unusual, but you can't be too safe today, so I think it's a good thing that you kind of stick together in pairs. Carry your phone so you can get to it if you need to. You carry your keys. Today, one of the great things about most of our cars is we have remote openers, and when you open it, your lights will come on, so it gives you some light when you're heading to your car if you're in a garage. But make sure you have your keys out. During the daytime, I have a bad habit of trying to find mine when I get out there, but if you're going out at night, always have them ahead of time. I mentioned this. Please consider moving your car somewhere closer if it's dark and it's a dark parking lot, or if there's lights and it's far away. If you can run out for a few minutes and move it closer, you should do that. This also, one of the guidelines talks a little bit about, again, one of the things with safety is if you're worried about safety, you should not worry about being polite. So if someone tries to approach you, normally you're going to try to be polite. If you're worried about safety, you don't have to. Keep going. Don't engage with somebody. You can say, sorry, I can't help you, and keep walking. If someone tries to stop you. If you're driving alone at night, you should keep your doors locked in your car. All of those things. But I encourage you to think about that. You don't have to be polite. If you go to get in an elevator in a building that's very empty and somebody else gets in, it's fine to say, sorry, I'm not going to take that elevator and step out. I think we often think that we're going to offend somebody, and I would encourage you to throw that notion out the window and think about your own safety. Traveling to clients, as much as I've done this work, I don't think any office ever told me to make sure my car is filled up with gas. If you're going out, your car should be filled. You want to make sure. I used to have a coworker who the running joke was to see how far she could go on empty with her car. That's not funny if she was somewhere and it was 30 below zero and she ran out of gas. So make sure if you are going out that your car is in good shape and you have plenty of gas in it. Also, one of the things I learned very late in my profession was if you go to somebody's home, always park your car facing the street, not down. Also, when you go to a client's home, if it's kind of a hump and you go down into the driveway, you should park your car further out towards the road. You want your car ready if you need to get out of there. And again, I think that may sound bizarre, but it's only one time that may ever happen to you, and you should be prepared. You should always lock your car when you go to clients, no matter how rural it is. You should always lock it. You never know when somebody's going to get in your car. Whether you have anything in it or not, you should lock it when you go into the client's house. When you do go into their home, you should make sure you know where your keys are if you do need to leave. Another great tip is if you are going to someone's home or apartment building, when you pull into the yard, you should call them and say, I'm here, I'm coming up to your apartment. If you call and they don't want to meet with you, then you can talk with them and leave. But you should always alert them that you're going to be coming to their front door, to the lobby to ring the bell, or up to their apartment. During the home visit, again, one of the things I said earlier is you should be assessing not only the client's safety, but you should be assessing your environment. So when you get to when you get to the building or the home, you should be taking stock of the place. You're looking around. I have gone into clients' homes, and when they lock the door behind me, I always ask them, can you leave the door unlocked? I'd feel more comfortable if you did. You should scan for weapons. It's not unusual in today's day and age to go into a home, and there is a weapon on the table. Somebody's cleaning a gun. I've gone into many home visits when there was somebody sitting at the kitchen table cleaning a gun. It's also not unusual in today's day and age to go into a home where there are needles laying on the table, where there may be people who live in that home who are using drugs. So to see needles laying around is not unusual for home visits. You should always be aware of if you think someone is using substances. Again, sometimes I think we feel uncomfortable saying, I'd rather end the visit, I'd rather not meet today. But if you do feel someone is using substances, we know in our profession that if somebody's using substances, they're not going to benefit from that interaction with you, so it's not really helpful for you to stay and try to have that interaction. We talked a little bit about dogs earlier, but be cautious of all animals. Dogs particularly, if you're a stranger, even if somebody says to you, my dog is the friendliest dog ever, if you're going into that home and during that visit a client may become upset or agitated, that animal may try to protect them and may bite you. So you need to be very aware of that. I encourage you to keep your phone out and available. And I'm going to say this again, but you also need your phone charged. If you do home visits, I strongly encourage you to have a car charger, and every time you go in and out of a visit, you plug your phone back in. I can't tell you how many times I've had supervisees call me at a later date and say, I was going to call you, but my phone went dead when I was out there. So your cell phone is no good to you if it goes dead. If I go into a home and I ever have any concerns that there may be safety, I always say right up front when I go, my office is expecting me to check back in. There's a crisis we've been working on. So if I get a text from them, I may need to step up and take it. I set that scenario up. So if they get agitated, I'm able to say, I'm going to step out, and my office just texted, I'm going to step out and take that. So that allows me to kind of have a reason to step out. The other thing that I can't stress enough is do not hesitate to leave and reschedule for any reason if you have that gut feeling. And I think we often have that gut feeling, and we try to push it down. As social workers, as women, as men, we push that feeling down and we say, I'm sure it's going to be fine. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. If you feel that, I really, really encourage you, because again, if that gut feeling is right, you may never have another opportunity to listen to it. So if you feel you need to leave, you should leave. And hopefully your agency will agree safety first and back that up. I think assessing prior violence is critical. I think probably out of everything that we talk about today, it's probably the one thing we do. I think almost every agency I've ever worked with, we do a nice job of trying to assess for violence. I've worked with a lot of agencies that if there's a history of violence for one of the two people you're going to see, that we often meet in the community first. So I think we do a nice job with that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. Again, safety first. The second mantra for me is safety trumps all. Safety should trump everything. If you have a home where you're going and you do question safety, go back and ask, can we meet this person in the community? Are there other options? Safety should always trump everything. If you are in a situation where there's violence again, get out any way you need to. We should not, at that point where we think there could be violence, start using our interpersonal skills and try to talk somebody down. We should get out of that situation and leave, do whatever we need to do, call 911 if we need to, but we should step out of the situation. I think, one of the things that I think is important that we think about is that plan if we do have the violence and we can't get out of the home. So if you do go into a home and somebody locks the door when you come in, or you come into a home and somebody stands on the side between you and the door, which can very well happen, I think you really want to think about when you first go in of assessing that and making changes before there's an incident. So if you go into a home and someone locks the door, or you go into a home and someone stands against the door, I think you can say to them, would you mind if I sit on this side? I think we've all been trained in some ways around the trying to be sure that we have our desk so we're not sitting behind it. So if someone comes in, we want to make sure that there's not sharp objects or objects on our desk that if someone's angry they can throw. So all of those things. You want to assess your office, you want to assess the home, you want to assess the environment, you want to assess the community, all of those things. The other thing I encourage is that if you do have an incident, or if you do have a situation where somebody came back and felt that there could have been potential, I hope if you deal with this, you deal with someone saying, I left because I felt unsafe, and they left that situation and there was no incident. If there's an actual incident, then everything's going to, you're going to have to call the police, everything's going to have to be done. But if an employee comes back and says, I left because I was feeling unsafe, I think that's a perfect time to start to really think about what do we have for our plan, what do we have in place, what do we need to talk about in our agency, what are we doing to support all of the employees and all of those things. So I want to kind of go over some of the tips that we've talked about for some of the final thoughts. So clothing is very important. We don't talk enough about that. If you're going out into the community, there's a variety of different things you should think about your clothing. If you work at a locked unit, psychiatric hospitals, they have very strict clothing policies. You can't wear long earrings. You can't wear scarves that somebody can grab. If you're going into a home, you want to have comfortable shoes on. You want to have comfortable clothes on. If you're going out into the community and it is in the winter and you live in northern Maine or you live in South Dakota or North Dakota, you want to have warm shoes. You want to make sure you have a warm coat. Again, even clothing in your car, if you're making home visits, you never know if you break down as you're heading back to the office or back to your home in the evening, that you have what you need. So clothing is very important to think about and talk about. Weather, when we talk about the elephant in the room and the money, I do have to say around weather, it's a challenge for a lot of agencies to say that it is bad weather today and you don't need to do your home visits or you don't need to go out into the storm. If you don't go out into the storm, the income's not coming in and that becomes the money issue. I do think agencies I have seen do a better job of not asking their workers to put themselves in jeopardy. I encourage you to think about as a worker, if you don't feel safe going out in bad weather, do you have days that you can use? Some agencies do allow storm days now. I know it's tough to say if I don't go out today, there's going to be a storm. I could lose my pay, but if you go out in that storm and you get injured or killed, then your pay is not going to matter. I had a colleague who went out in a sleet storm one day. They had a meeting set up that they had rescheduled twice, and she opted to go out in a day when it was sleet and freezing rain, and she was killed in an auto accident on the way to that meeting. And I know if I would have talked to her about not going to that meeting, she would have said, I can't reschedule that, but because that weather was so bad, she didn't have an opportunity to reschedule. So there are times when I think we just need to really think about putting ourselves first and putting safety first and being sure that we're dealing with that. So again, I think when we talk about the areas, how rural, or even if it's urban, if you have a phone, are you going to be able to use it in that area? I once had a supervisee who did family visits with a family, and she would drive to this home, and the family left snowshoes by the road, and she parked her car on the side of the road, which was this dirt road that was barely plowed in the winter, and she snowshoed into this family's home. And I remember about 5 years after leaving that agency thinking, if anything had ever happened, I don't know where that worker was. She said, I'm going out to this area, which was a town, but we never had an actual address, and I don't even know how far she snowshoed. So I think, again, as supervisees, we really need to think about it. If we have people out there we're responsible for, are they safe and where are they? Now, we weren't using Google Maps, but we could use Google Maps today. We could know that. The other thing you could do, and I don't know anybody that does this yet, but you actually could use your phones, your cell phones, and they could be tracked by the office. So we could use the phones for reception today to actually track where someone is if we needed to. It would be an easy app to download on your phone, and that whoever the support person at your staff could actually have the app and track where anybody is at any time. That's not about Big Brother keeping an eye on you. That's about you being safe if need be. So again, we talked about the whole calendar thing, but I think staff and coworkers need to know where you are. I think you need to keep in touch. If you go to a home and you have any questions, I encourage it when you get to that driveway, you call the office and say, I'm at the Smith's family. I'm going in. I will call you when I come out. I will not be more than an hour and a half. If you're going to be more than an hour and a half, I encourage you to say to the family, I was expected at another home. I'm going to step out and call the office. You step out and call the office. You say, I'm going longer than an hour and a half. Things are okay. I don't have any concerns, but I'll call you when I get done. There's nothing wrong with taking a few more minutes to try to make sure that we're keeping ourselves safe and everybody around us. Again, with the schedule, I encourage all of you to think about, there's 100 different ways to do that, but some schedule that's really easy, that can be done on an app, that people update on a hourly basis. The other tip I want to share is upkeep of your car. I know for me, the first 5 years after I graduated, I had a car that was not in good shape. I actually used to need to set in it at night for 10 or 15 minutes and let it run before I could leave a yard or it would shut off. So it wasn't a great car to be doing home visits. I mean, I don't think we always have the ability to buy a brand new car or have those resources, but as much as you can be sure you're keeping the car up, that's full of gas, that you think you have a good battery so it's not going to die on you, that if you are often very rural areas, you have a spare tire in your car that if you need to change it. Because again, you can say, well, I have AAA, but if you're in an area where you have no reception, you can't call for that help. So again, parking, I mentioned that. Not only do I encourage you to park with your car facing the road, I encourage you to think about when you park on the street where you're parking. Try not to park in a place where you're going to get blocked in. I've certainly parked at clients' homes before where 5 other people came after I parked, or one of the kids come home from school and a bunch of their friends all came, and I was completely blocked in. So I wouldn't have been able to get out in that situation. Supervision. I really encourage you to use some of the time when you have supervision that you're able to talk with your supervisees about safety. How do they feel? Do they have a plan? Do they go to any homes where there's a question? Even if they're in the office, if they're seeing somebody in the office, do they feel that they have a safety plan? How is their office set up? If you're busy and they need you, what is the backup plan? All of those types of things. The agency as well, if you are in a position, like I said, as a supervisor, if you're not, if you're a worker in that agency, I would encourage you to use this training and say, I said it on this webinar. One of the things that they talked about was safety, and they talked about that many, many agencies do not have safety plans and that we don't talk enough about it in our profession. And I'm wondering if it's something that we can talk about at our next staff meeting. I'm wondering if it's something that we can begin to explore and see if there's things that we can do to be more prepared in our agency for that. So, and if there is an incident, again, not an incident where there's violence, but an incident where somebody comes back to the agency early because they feel they felt unsafe, make sure you debrief that. Make sure you talk about it. The first time you have an employee come back and say they felt unsafe, and then they feel penalized for that, they're told you should have stayed anyway, or you should have done this, or you shouldn't have done that, and we do not put safety first, then your message will be to everybody else in that agency, safety is not important in this agency, and you're going to need to kind of push those gut feelings down and not deal with that. So we want to try to avoid that. So I tried to leave a few minutes. Do we have some questions okay, so I've left a few minutes as we get near the end of the slide. The other thing I do have is my contact here, my email and my number. If we don't get through the questions, which we probably won't, and you do want to reach out to me, I will do my best to answer those questions and get back to you. I do say I'm not an expert in safety. I'm not an expert in ethics, but one of the things that I really try to do in this profession is try to put the issues on the table so each office and each agency can begin to explore that, which is more unique to your own clients, your own culture, your own community, and your own agency and the individuals you're serving. So I'm going to take a few questions now. For those of us in solo practice, what can we do to increase our safety? I think that's a wonderful answer. And I think you want to think about a few things if you're in a solo practice, because many of you are. And many of you are not going to have resources to do a lot of other things. I would encourage you to think about a few things. Where is your office? What are the protocols? Do you keep the office locked? Is that something you could do? If you have clients coming while you're with a client, is it possible that you could have a doorbell and you tell your clients that they're going to need to ring the doorbell? Could you invest in somebody who is in your office later in the day if you're keeping the door locked, who could let people in? Where is your car when you get done later in the day? If it's in an area that is dangerous, are there ways that you can maybe know somebody in the next office, even if they're not a social worker, and that you can reach out? Know other people in your community, because if you have a community, you're going to feel safer that there's people you can reach out to rather than working in isolation. When going to home visits, if the client persists that you should follow him or her around the home, which I know is not allowed, how as a social worker can we handle it right there? I really encourage you to talk to your office and create some policies that help set you up for that. So if you're able to say, one of the things that I think is great is if you can call and talk to the client before you go to the home. I often try to lay some ground rules, one of them being, do you have any large pets? If so, can you put them in the back room? I know when I come out to your home, I'm coming to work with your 14-year-old daughter, and she may want me to go to her room, but one of the things I just want to let you know is our policy is going to be that I'm going to meet with you in the kitchen or the living room area, and I will stay there. So feel free to create some policies around that, and rather than you being put on the spot, you can kind of blame the agency or say that these are the agency policies. Then that helps you so you don't feel like they see you as not wanting to have a tour of their home, for example. What are your suggestions for safety in small community nonprofits where clients are coming into the office and there are safety and behavioral issues? I think as an agency, you really have to talk about that. I think there's a sense of us as social workers that we have to serve everybody no matter what. And I think if you have a family coming in or an individual coming in, there's safety concerns, I think you really want to talk about an office and setting some protocols around that. Again, even asking clients who are coming in, do you have weapons? If you do, I need you to leave them out in your vehicle. But I think as an office, sitting down and talking about what can we do to be safer. Should we lock the door? If the receptionist, for example, almost every small mental health agency I know of, the door's not locked and the receptionist is sitting there. If somebody's going to come in and they're angry, they're going to face the receptionist. And that's usually the last person we give any training to. So when you have these meetings, you want to bring her in. And I think you want to talk about what do we do to try to make the office safer. Another thing I don't think we do enough is call our local PD and say, can we talk with you about, we have a couple of situations where they could be unsafe, and how do we make a connection? Local PD today are often able to help you set up on your phone, so you push one button and they're going to know you need them to come. Local law enforcement are some of your best resources, and we don't use them enough. Is it okay to lie or stretch the truth to a parent in regard to child abuse report being made against them, especially when you feel that parent can be violent? So there's a lot of controversy around this. So if you need to make a report, one of the things we talk a lot about in our field is we should be very upfront and talk with all families. If we're making a report, they have a right to know. I have to tell you, when you think the child is at risk or you are at risk, I think you need to do what you need to do. So I don't think you need to lie, but I don't think you need to be open about making a report if you feel that family is going to be violent. And again, I think you want to talk to your supervisor, and I think you want to have a plan in place. One of the areas we've always done a great job around safety is when it comes to child reporting and going into homes. Police have always been willing to accompany child protection workers when you're going in to remove a child, when you're going into to assess a report. PD have always been involved in that, so we've done a nice job. But I don't think you need to say to that family in their home, I made a report, and I think there's going to be somebody coming to meet with you and your family when you feel you're putting yourself in jeopardy. Again, I would encourage you to go back to that red language of safety trumps all. And when that happens, I think you need to do what you need to do to be safe, and that may require you not to share information with that client. How do you bring up the issue when interviewing for a job or an interview? That's wonderful, because you know what? I don't think we feel safe doing that. And I think one of the ways you do that is you say, one of the things I'm seeing NASW talk a lot about, one of the things I'm seeing a lot of states across this country talk about is safety. And can I ask you, what is your safety protocol in this agency? And if you're interviewing and they say we have none, it would be, I think, wonderful if you said, if I were hired, how would you feel about me helping to write some protocols around safety? So I strongly encourage you to bring it up in an interview and put it on the table. If there's no furniture to sit on between the client and the door during home visits, do you suggest standing? This goes along the lines of being polite and safety for self. There's a lot of things around that. I once worked with a young man, which I used to meet at his home, and there was some violent issues. And anytime I was able to, I would ask him how he would feel about sitting outside on the front stoop. I didn't even feel comfortable being in the home. So if there's no furniture, if you're not in a real urban area, if you're in a rural area, what if you said, could we sit outside? How would you feel about sitting outside? It's a nice day today. There's a nice breeze. You can't really do that if there's neighbors or there's confidentiality, but if there's a way that you can do that. Now, if you feel there's no furniture in the living room there and there's a straight shot, but you want to assess that, and I think if you feel like standing and that feels safer, there's nothing wrong with doing that. I'm going to take one more question. Would you like to know how agencies are regulated? Would like to know how agencies are regulated by the government in terms of workforce safety standards and how effectively it's been monitored? Well, that's an interesting question. And if you're a very large agency, they are often monitored, which is why places such as hospitals have a lot of policies around safety, because they are monitored. Most of our small clinics are not monitored in any way, and there are no standards set up. Places like hospitals, prisons, psychiatric units, they are monitored, and it is, I think it is effective, and I think they really look at that. But most of our agencies we work at are not. So I think that's something we need to keep talking about. So thank you all. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk with you. I hope you all go back to your agencies tomorrow, and I just hope at the water cooler you start talking about safety and just put this on your agenda for your next staff meeting. So thank you all.
Thank you, Wanda. That was an excellent and actionable presentation. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
You're most welcome.
Thank you also to University of New England's Online Master of Social Work program for making today's presentation possible. And finally, thank you to our attendees for joining us today and for trusting Social Work Today as your professional resource.